The self-proclaimed Republic of Transnistria is perhaps the most mysterious and forbidding corner of Europe. It is recognised by no one. Little wonder then that when it celebrated 10 years of independence last year, no international guests attended the party. That was of little concern to Transnistria's president, Igor Smirnov. His army is huge, and he uses a massive internal security service to control Transnistria's 700,000 residents. But of greater concern to the West are allegations that the regime here is producing and trafficking weapons, among them so-called dirty bombs.
Here we have weapons which, if they were to end up in the hands of terrorists, could do tremendous harm, scattering large areas of a city centre with radioactive waste. Now, the very fact that these weapons are in the hands of a regime that, to be blunt, we cannot trust. We cannot trust and we cannot predict what they're going to do, automatically creates trouble for the outside world.
Dr. Mark Galliotti is an expert on Russian organised crime and writes for Jane's Defence Weekly. He also advises British intelligence on the growing criminal threat to Europe from the east.
You actually have Transnistria as this festering criminal sore which is infecting all its neighbouring countries. We know that Russian and Ukrainian criminals have safe havens there. We also know that Transnistrian gangs have moved into neighbouring Moldova and through Moldova into Romania, which in turn is a backdoor into the European Union.
Transnistria used to be part of the eastern half of Moldova. After World War II, Moldova was swallowed by the Soviet Union, and when that collapsed in 1991, it was quick to declare independence. But from the start, the country was split into two, with Russians in the eastern half deciding they wanted no part of an independent Moldova. The self-styled Republic of Transnistria was born. When Transnistria broke away, military forces from both sides poured into the conflict zone. Dug into their positions, what followed was a Sarajevo-style sniper war, which cost almost 2,000 lives before hostilities ceased in mid-92. Now in the West, Moldova is trying hard to show off its newly gained sophistication and demonstrate its readiness to join the European community. But just 1 hour's drive east, life remains as it was during the Cold War days of the Soviet Empire, with the Russians still in charge.
Евро-Супер 98. Приобретайте лучшее.
I've decided to travel to Transnistria to investigate the claims of arms trafficking and organised crime. At the border zone, there's a series of Moldovan checkpoints before you reach Transnistria. There's a European travel ban on Transnistria's leaders, so European passport holders are usually turned back. But an Australian was considered innocuous enough. Soon I was in Transnistria's capital, Tiraspol. Travelling here really is like stepping through a time warp into the glory days of the Soviet Union. Communist icons like Lenin and the hammer and sickle are everywhere to be seen, and huge banners encourage its citizens to be proud of their republic's achievements. But Western police believe that Transnistria is a lawless place where even the authorities participate in organised crime.
In Transnistria they can operate without problems with the authorities, because the leadership there is is involved in their business.
The leadership is corrupt.
No, corrupt is the minimum, is involved.
Paolo Sartori is an Italian Interpol liaison officer based in Romania's capital, Bucharest. He has spent years studying crime networks in the Balkans and says Transnistria deserves its shady reputation.
We are worried, even the other Western countries are worried. You know that organized crime is widespread all over the world, not only in Transnistria, but where you can work with the local authorities and you can have international relationship in the fight against organized crime and terrorism. At least you know which is the problem, how huge is it, and what you can do. But if there is a black hole where you cannot do anything, and where the criminal organization and even the leadership of the country is a problem more big.
The West is impotent because Transnistria has the might of Russia on its side. Not far from Transnistria's capital, Russian troops still guard their Soviet-era stockpiles of weapons and ammunition, kept here as a deterrent to NATO. Transnistria maintains a cosy relationship with Russia and its 14th Army, which helps explain why the regime has managed to survive so long. As you drive around the capital, Tiraspol, you soon notice that alongside the Soviet icons, the five-pronged sheriff emblem is also proudly displayed. It may have echoes of the Wild West, but this is Transnistria's biggest commercial enterprise, running dozens of virtual monopolies on everything from petrol stations to supermarkets.
Чук, но нет, передача на борца, можно бить, удар Вадима Борца, гол! Гол, великолепнейший гол Вадима Борца!
Sheriff even owns the local football team, along with the most breathtaking sight in Tiraspol, the Sheriff Football Complex.
Но в спорте нет, как говорится, политики. Эти сооружения построены для людей, для болельщиков, чтобы они радовались и получали удовольствие от проведенного мероприятия или состоявшегося матча. Поэтому нас политика не интересует. Вот, применяется.
At the Sheriff Stadium, director Peter Lyaluk is happy to show me around. Built to international standards, there are actually two stadiums, 4 training fields with imported turf, an athletics track, an international hotel, and an elite boarding school to train future football champions. Estimates of its cost range from $250 to $300 million. That's about 5 to 6 times Transnistria's official annual revenue.
И сколько стоит строим все?
Мы еще строим, поэтому я не знаю. Мы еще строим.
Но
потому что
пока?
Не готов сказать, бухгалтерия этим занимается.
Вниманию владельцев автотранспорта. С 5 июля работает новая автозаправочная станция фирмы «Шериф».
But Moldovan and Western police and customs officials are convinced that the Sheriff Company is involved in the smuggling of contraband. Transnistria has an official customs service on its border with Ukraine, which is run by one of President Smirnov's sons, Vladimir. Experts say corrupt Ukrainian officials are allowing unchecked consignments through the Black Sea port of Ilyachevsk and into Transnistria.
Из порта приезжают в Тирасполь, никто их нигде не останавливает, ни таможня, ничего. Они приезжают в Тирасполь, там происходит, скажем так, разделение грузов, и дальше они уходят в другие места.
Colonel Ion Leu has worked in Moldova's Interior Ministry all his life, in Soviet times with the local KGB and now with Moldova's intelligence agency, advising on organised crime and terrorism.
Например, на украинской границе примерно 1 раз в год менялся полный состав пограничников. потому что они помогали шерифу, другим структурам вывозить контрабандный товар на Украину, и там он терялся.
Back at the stadium, Peter resents any suggestion that the sheriff complex was built with black money.
Это неправда. Это неправда. Все строится. Можно было бы эти деньги, которые есть в компании, вложить где-то за рубежом, для того, чтобы о них никто не знал. А здесь вложили эти деньги для того, чтобы развивался футбол в республике и в целом выходить на международный уровень, и дается предпочтение подрастающему поколению, это детям, юношам.
In the centre of Tiraspol is the city's restored cathedral with its golden domes. This too was a gift from the Sheriff Company. However, it's shunned by some churchgoers as a place tainted with dirty money. But the Sheriff Company is eager to promote itself as Transnistria's wholesome benefactor.
Как у всякой идущей вперед компании, которая имеет серьезные деньги, имеет серьезный бизнес, разумеется, есть недоброжелатели. Вот. Но эти люди говорят, а фирма «Шериф» работает. Вот есть такая поговорка в Азии: собака лает, караван идет. Вот это как раз тот случай.
Nikolai Lazunov is director of the Sheriff TV station, and he wanted to tell me why the description of Transnistria as a criminal state was unwarranted.
13 лет говорят про Приднестровье, что это рассадник контрабанды. За эти 13 лет ни одного патрона на границе не было найдено. Если бы был найден хоть один случай контрабанды, если бы было бы доказан хоть один факт торговли оружием, разумеется, об этом наутро бы, благодаря молдавским СМИ, узнал бы весь мир.
In fact, last year, in a story later picked up by the Washington Post, the Moldovan media reported that Tiraspol had the material to build dirty bombs. Left over from Soviet times, 38 Alazan rockets, their tips filled with a radioactive isotope and providing the same result as a small dirty bomb, are being secretly kept by the Transnistrian regime.
Часть из них попытались, скажем так, демонтировать. Но поскольку серьезных специалистов не было, то побоялись, что люди получат заражение, и тогда эти ракеты были спрятаны. Я знаю, где они спрятаны, но я не буду пока говорить, это не принципиально. Они спрятаны на территории Приднестровья. Я допускаю, что если бы эти ракеты действительно представляли интерес и нашелся бы покупатель, они бы их продали.
If, let's say, the price was right, if it looked as if they could sell them without it immediately being tracked back to Transnistria, I certainly couldn't guarantee that the criminals who are really in the heart of the Transnistrian government would not be prepared to sell them. So yeah, potentially it's a source of vast different arrays of weapons of mass destruction.
I asked my minders for a tour of Transnistria's largest industrial plant, the Electromash factory, which it is said is used to manufacture conventional weapons. To my surprise, my request was granted. In days gone by, this factory was a showpiece of Soviet engineering and ingenuity, and it remains highly productive. On the factory floor, women construct huge generators used for Siberian oil and gas pipelines, whilst overhead they also have the delicate task of loading and shifting with the mechanised swinging cranes. Over several hours I was shown through at least a third of the factory, which the foreman told me also produced washing machines and a range of industrial equipment. From the perspective of my short tour, it seemed that everything in this factory was above board.
But according to Western intelligence officials, factories like Electromash are far more sinister than they appear. They claim that the production of washing machines and generators is simply the front for a far more lucrative trade, the manufacture of weapons, from pistols to handheld missile systems, which are shipped to the world's hotspots at an alarming rate.
The industries now lying in Transnistria that are still operating there during Soviet times produced lots of armaments for the Soviet military. We know that it's high-quality production, and we know that this production continues.
Based in Moldova, Ambassador William Hill represents the OSCE, or the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He says Transnistria's factories produce an incredible array of weaponry.
We know, for example, that a whole range of conventional arms are produced there. Makarov pistols, Kalashnikov rifles, Grad rocket launcher systems and rockets, components for surface-to-air missiles, components for submarines, large, medium-sized and large-scale mortars, other parts for heavy military equipment. This is just some of the stuff that's produced there.
And not only is Transnistria producing weapons, but according to Interpol, it's selling them as well.
And they sell weapons all over the world, mainly illegal. And they don't care the owner, the customer with whom they work. They sell weapons to the Chechen terrorists, to the criminal organization, to the other extremist groups who operate in the international terrorism, and so on and so on.
Back in Tiraspol, I'm granted an interview with Transnistria's Deputy Industries Minister, Yuri Ganin. He acknowledges that weapons were produced in Tiraspol in the past, but not any longer.
Конечно, когда имел место конфликт 1992 года, когда шла война, безусловно, с помощью наших инженеров, наших рабочих, наших конструкторов у нас было организовано производство продукции для того, чтобы обеспечить наши вооруженные силы. И на период войны, безусловно, промышленность помогала и нашей армии воевать. Но это было сделано только на тот период. Армия у нас обеспечена, поэтому какое-то дальнейшее производство у нас давно приостановлено, у нас его вполне достаточно для наших вооруженных сил.
Transnistria's presidential bodyguards simulate an assassination attempt as young recruits look on. Transnistria has a number of security services and a court system, but investigating Transnistria's links to organised crime and the arms trade can be lethal.
Первый прокурор Приднестровья, Борис Лучик, начал искать материалы, но на него было совершено покушение. Его жена погибла в результате взрыва бомбы, он остался живой, хотя был очень сильно ранен. И после этого уже ни один прокурор, ни одна правоохранительная структура в Приднестровье и в Молдавии не занимаются этим вопросом.
According to Colonel Leyu, Transnistria's current criminal structure can be traced back to the regime's state security service. He says that about 10 years ago, Transnistria's security service took over control of organised crime.
Они полностью ликвидировали серьезных, влиятельных криминальных авторитетов. Но вакуум не бывает. Все равно структуры какие-то оставались. Ими кто-то должен был управлять.
The person in charge was this man, Vladimir Antufeyev, Transnistria's Minister of Internal Security.
Когда он стал уже большим начальником, руководителем службы безопасности, вот тогда он создал идею, о которой я вам сказал. Когда он заявил, что надо 100 человек убрать из оборота и создать режим. Вот этот человек убрал тех, кто ему мешал по-настоящему, и сегодня он действительно является одним из самых-самых важных чиновников в Приднестровье.
Antofeev first came to the attention of international police when the Baltic state of Latvia declared independence in 1991. He was a commander of an elite Soviet police division which stormed the Latvian Interior Ministry, killing 5 people.
You have to know that the Minister of the National Security of Transnistria has an international warrant. He is wanted by Interpol for homicide and other crimes in the former Soviet Union.
Vladimir Antofeev declined Dateline's request for an interview, but I did have an opportunity to speak to President Igor Smirnov. As a Russian passport holder, Transnistria's leader was casting his vote in Russia's parliamentary elections. I asked him to respond to the allegations that Transnistria's government was involved in organised crime and arms trafficking.
Поэтому говорить о том, что у нас не так, я просто не буду. Пусть приезжают сюда, поживут, увидят и поймут, что здесь именно общество управляет государством.
To what extent does Smirnov, does his name connect to the criminal activities?
Personally, we don't know, but in Transnistria nothing can be done without the approval of the leadership. And so it's easy to realize that at least he knows what happened over there.
So what you're saying is it's impossible that he doesn't know what's going on?
Yes.
For many Transnistrians, Russia remains the motherland, so Russian election day is a big deal. Tiraspol has so many Russian passport holders that it even has a designated representative in the Russian parliament. Late last year, despite the West's concern about President Smirnov's regime, Moscow suggested that Moldova and Transnistria should be reunited in an equal federation. It caused a storm of protest in neighbouring Moldova. In Moldova's capital, Chisinau, 80,000 people gathered in the city square demanding that their government reject the Russian plan and resign.
Trebuie să o scandăm acum. Moldova fără comuniști! Moldova fără comuniști!
These people want no part of what they see as a criminal regime. And suspicious of their former masters, they want the Russian army to get out of the region. The United States and Europe also rejected the Moscow plan, suggesting instead that international peacekeepers be sent into Transnistria ahead of any future settlement. There's also pressure for weapons inspections, but Smirnov's regime is only offering controlled one-off visits to its factories.
How do you know when you've seen enough? I mean, the invitation to inspect a few factories at selected times is not something that was satisfactory to inspectors or to the UN in Iraq. And it's a problem that we've not been able to resolve here.
At President Igor Smirnov's most recent inauguration as Transnistria's leader, the Kremlin-style fanfare was proudly televised in defiance of mounting criticism from the West. In Tiraspol, the leadership continues to ignore the outside world. But in a world increasingly intolerant of rogue states with sinister reputations, Transnistria's future will become a more urgent priority.
It was again, I think, a product of the pre-9/11 era, that we hadn't really thought at just how dangerous these weapon systems would be in the hands of terrorists. It's only, I think, in the modern security environment that we actually start thinking not just will governments use these weapons, but what happens if and when these weapons end up in the hands of extremists or terrorists or criminals or blackmailers and so forth. That is unfortunately the nature of the brave new world in which we live. So we've known about it, but I think we've never really put it in the right kind of context until more recently.
Председатель Центральной избирательной комиссии вручает президенту.